13th century. A time of crusades, swords, faith, and, strangely enough, children who embarked on their own tragic crusade. Sounds incredible? Like a legend? But this is a real story, full of pain, deceit, and lost hopes. Imagine not knights in shining armor, but thousands of children, barefoot, poorly dressed. Inspired by the speeches of a shepherd boy, they leave their homes. They abandon games, family, their familiar lives, and set off. Where to? Why? And most importantly, what happened to these young souls caught in the whirlwind of adult intrigues? Today, we will delve into one of the most mysterious, heart-wrenching, and instructive pages of history. The history of the Children's Crusades. And believe me, the end of this story will leave you deeply shocked, making you ponder many things. 13th century Europe is not just a continent, it's a boiling cauldron of passions, contradictions, and ambitions. On one hand, there was the bloody struggle against the Albigensian heresy, where the flames of the Inquisition's pyres consumed not only heretics, but also the innocent. Endless wars, like the conflict between Bulgaria and Byzantium, tore the lands apart. On the other hand, the Crusaders, who seemingly were supposed to bring the light of faith, but often instead engaged in looting, capturing Constantinople, and ravaging the Cilician kingdom in the Levant. Their true motives were not so much holy convictions as a thirst for power and wealth. And at this moment, the Pope, as if, like a chess player, seeks new moves, new opportunities to expand his influence. His gaze turns northward to the pagan Livonian tribes, which could be converted to Christianity, encountering, as he thought, relatively little resistance. And then, like a bolt from the blue, in the spring of 1212, in France, in the village of Cloyes, a boy named Stephen appears. He is only 12 years old, an ordinary shepherd, illiterate. But he claims that Christ himself appeared to him in the guise of a pilgrim and handed him a parchment, a message to the King of France, calling to gather an army of children and go to liberate Jerusalem. Etienne perhaps did not fully understand what he was saying himself, but his words, his fervent faith, his childlike sincerity acted like a magnet on people. He spoke simply but convincingly, telling of miracles, about the divine purpose of children. Chroniclers who described these events years later noted in Etienne an astonishing combination of naivety and some innate cunning, an ability to influence the crowd. And people, weary of the cruelty of war, believed him, sought hope in him. The 12-year-old Etienne, this little prophet, and his spontaneously gathered army, where sticks replaced swords and homemade slingshots replaced shields, attracted more and more attention. Rumors about him spread throughout France. He is even, imagine, presented to King Philip II. The king, a seasoned politician, sees this movement more as a threat than a benefit. At first, Pope Innocent III perhaps even nurtured the hope of using this youthful energy for his own purposes, as a tool of pressure, as a living symbol of faith. But very soon the situation gets out of control. Children are undisciplined soldiers. They cannot be managed. The king, in the end, considered this venture complete foolishness and dangerous madness. He refers the decision to the judgment of the University of Paris, the center of scholarship at that time. And the university delivers its verdict. The movement is the devil's machinations. Send the children back home. Punish the instigators. But stopping this wave, this tsunami of childlike faith and despair, is already impossible. It's like trying to stop an avalanche with bare hands. Children aged 7 to 14, inspired by the speeches of Etienne and other young preachers who appear like mushrooms after the rain, organize real religious processions. They walk along the roads, sing psalms, pray, and talk about miraculous healings and signs. The atmosphere becomes extremely tense, turning into mass hysteria. Imagine, crowds of children are moving along the roads of France, estimated to be up to 30,000. And among them are not only the sincerely devout, blinded by religious fanaticism. they are joined by those who see an opportunity for personal gain in this chaos. Runaway monks who have lost their faith and are seeking sustenance. Petty criminals hiding from justice. Bankrupt merchants hoping for a miracle. They exploit the children's naivety, their faith, and their desperation for their own selfish purposes. A similar story. As if reflected in a mirror, it is happening in Germany as well. There, the leader becomes a 10-year-old boy named Nicholas Istria. But unlike Etienne, behind Nicholas stands his father, a cunning and calculating shoemaker with a rather dubious reputation. He, like a puppeteer, pulls the strings, directing his son and using his popularity for his own interests. If in France, Etienne is carried in a decorated cart, surrounded by noble ladies who see him as almost a saint, then in Germany all attention is focused on Nicholas, who also gathers around him a huge number of supporters, children, teenagers, and even adults who have lost all hope. What did the organizers of these strange tragic marches actually want to achieve? The true motives remain a mystery, a subject of debate among historians. Some believe that the children never intended to go to the distant Holy Land. They were merely tools, pawns in the grand game of adults, a means to attract attention, to collect donations, to support new, more extensive crusades planned by kings and the Pope. Other historians are convinced that the organizers, and primarily the children themselves, sincerely believed in their special mission, that it was they, the pure and innocent, who were destined to free the tomb of the Lord. They believed that their faith was stronger than swords, that God was on their side. But regardless of the beliefs, the outcome was the same: a heart-wrenching tragedy. Hundreds, thousands of children never returned home. They perished from hunger, disease, exhaustion, and became victims of bandits. The most terrifying part is that many of them fell into the hands of slave traders who saw them only as living merchandise. The German and French children's crusades, despite the overall tragic narrative, had their own characteristics. For example, in Germany, and this is astonishing, in the city of Cologne alone, several tens of thousands of silver marks were collected for the needs of the Crusaders, for their equipment, and for sustenance. This is a colossal sum, equivalent to more than 3 tons of pure silver. One can only imagine how strong the influence of this movement was, how much people believed in its success, given that they were willing to donate such enormous amounts. Moreover, authorities in different countries reacted to these events in various ways. The Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Frederick II Hohenstaufen, a man known for being tough, pragmatic, and for his cynical attitude towards religion, did not stand on ceremony with the child crusaders. He gave a direct order to establish military control over anyone recruiting children and to destroy them by force if they resisted. This led to bloody clashes. The bands of child crusaders, driven to desperation, resisted, attacked villages, looted, and burned houses. The violence, cruelty, and the enormous number of casualties, both in battles and from hunger and disease, led to a rapid decline in support for the movement among ordinary people. Mothers mourned their missing children. Fathers cursed those who had dragged them into this adventure. Many children, exhausted, sick, and hungry, simply scattered, returned home if there was a home to return to, or sought refuge in villages where they were fed and hidden out of pity. The movement, which began with such enthusiasm and hope, gradually disintegrated, turning to dust. The French children, led by Etienne, relatively quickly reached the Mediterranean coast. They believed that the sea would part before them, as it did for Moses, opening a path to the Holy Land. But the miracle did not happen. The sea remained the sea. However, the German Crusaders had a much harder time. They faced a long and dangerous journey through the Alps, across passes where they were awaited by hunger, cold, diseases, and bandits. But they too, eventually exhausted and weakened, reached the Mediterranean Sea, Genoa, and also hoped for a miracle. But instead of a miracle, 2 merchants, Hugo Ferius and Wilhelm Porcus, appeared, who generously offered to transport the children across the sea on 7 ships. For free. And here begins the most terrible part of the story. 2 ships filled with children, got caught in a storm and sank off the coast of Sardinia. Everyone on board perished. According to legend, the survivors built a church on the island dedicated to the Immaculate Conception, but today there is no trace of it left. The remaining 5 ships, they did not reach the Holy Land. They changed course and docked in North Africa, in Algeria and Egypt, where the unfortunate children, deceived and betrayed, were sold in slave markets like cattle. The boys were sold into slavery for hard labor or, even worse, as eunuchs in harems, and the girls as concubines into sexual slavery. And the most terrible, the most cynical part of this whole story is that none of the European kings, none of the knightly orders, who seemingly should have protected them, the Christians, even attempted to ransom these children from slavery. No one showed any mercy. A few of them, by some miracle, managed to survive and reach the Holy Land, but not as liberators, not as heroes, but in chains, as captives, as goods that were traded from hand to hand. The last known group of children sold in Baghdad simply vanished, dissolved into the sands of time. Their traces are lost forever. The Children's Crusades are not just a historical episode. It is a tragedy that unfolded before the eyes of the entire world. A story of blind faith, of cruel deception, of the cynicism of adults who use children for their selfish purposes. It shows how terrifying, inhuman reality can be hidden behind the most seemingly noble and lofty ideas, and reminds us of how dangerous blind faith is, how easy it is to manipulate the crowd, and how important it is to maintain critical thinking, even in the face of the most seemingly indisputable authorities. Thank you for watching until the end. This story makes you think about a lot, doesn't it? If you liked this video, if it touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. There are many more interesting and instructive stories ahead.